To be clear,
he said that C5 could be used for that. I asked specifically.
Could be.
Yes, they haven't said would be.
Pierre Poilievre goes on Vassy and proves once and for all that he can stand his ground against any of the mainstream media. Mark Carney takes Canada into the Middle East conflict. All that and more. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party and the official opposition, went on CTV with Vassy and he was talking to her about some of the things that Canadians are being confronted by. Now, in full disclosure, I find Vassy to be very articulate at the job. I don't say to you that I agree with her position. I don't agree with her necessarily her politics, which I don't really know what they are. But I can say that from a journalistic standpoint, she seems to always be very even-keeled. She always seems to go after everyone with the same vigor and with the same intuitiveness, the same thoroughness. Pierre Poilievre is no exception, and a couple of times that she tried to really push Pierre Poilievre on some of her questions, Pierre Poilievre was able to not only push back, but put her back on her heels, and it's worth looking at, so you'll want to stick around to watch that. Mark Carney made an official announcement with a whole bunch of other countries today that they were going to be recognizing Palestine. I'm not sure why we are bothering with this particular stance diplomatically. My position I will make clear when we cover that story. And it turns out that nearly 100 of Canada's top CEOs, highest paid individuals in the country, wrote an open letter to Mark Carney telling him that he needs to be doing these few steps so that they can get investment in Canada. Mark Carney does not seem to be acting on it at all. Before we get into all of that, though, I'd encourage all of you to like, subscribe, comment, and share this channel with all of your socials. That's if you're watching and you're not already subscribed. If you are subscribed, I appreciate that. And if you want to share it with your socials, I appreciate that as well. Okay, let's get into this. We will open with Mark Carney and the Liberal government's desire to acknowledge Palestine. Many countries around the world did it at the same time, not the United States, but lots of those countries that did it also have strong ties to a small organization that is based in Switzerland. However, let's leave that aside. Let's just look at the fact that the Liberal government has decided to stick our noses into a conflict that's been going on for a long time. Now, he lists it as 1947, and he says that there's a whole bunch of things that he's doing this for. Somehow, he believes that acknowledging Palestine will stop the Knesset from annexing the West Bank, for example. He believes that by acknowledging Palestine, he can force Hamas to not exist anymore, or at least to not take part in any political parts of the Palestinian peoples. Further, the statement, which I'll leave a link to, goes on to say on how the Palestinian Authority promises to allow for democratic votes and promises to demilitarize. That would be astounding. Like, you might be able to convince the outside world that you're holding democratic elections. I mean, all you have to do is just tell who everybody is to vote for. I mean, the Liberal government knows how to swing votes all the time, so they should realize that that's just a pipe dream. But to say to me that a country in the Middle East that is surrounded by people who, it's not just Israel that has an issue with the Palestinians. It's not like they're welcome in Jordan. It's not like they're welcome in Lebanon. It's not like they're welcome in Egypt. I mean, there's all kinds of people in the region that have a strong, let's call it distrust for the Palestinians, or at least the military aspects of the Palestinians. And what you want me to believe is that these guys are all of a sudden going to disarm in the Middle East where everybody is armed. So that's kind of a strange dichotomy. That's kind of an odd thing for the Canadian Prime Minister to be telling us, that he's doing this so that will be enough to bring peace to this region that hasn't seen peace in a long, long time. My position is that Canada should not be sticking our noses into any foreign conflict, not a single solitary one of them. In my view, Canada, when you come to the Canadian border and you want to come into Canada, you cross that border, you have to leave behind every conflict you have. It doesn't matter where you come from, because we have them all, because we have everybody, a representation of everyone on earth in all likelihood. More than any country on earth has the representations here inside of Canada. Which means, of course, that we have an example of every conflict and grudge match on the whole earth. In this country, we have rules that are traditions about not allowing parliament, houses of parliament, especially provincial houses of parliament, to display religious symbolism. And that, of course, is because it's founded on the idea that some people were Catholic and some people were Protestant. So we have been going back our very roots. We have been making sure that we don't import these conflicts, whether they be regional or whether they be religion. And like regional, you could be looking at Irish versus English. You could be looking at Catholic versus Protestant. You could be looking at a whole host of them without ever factoring in the rest of the planet that has come into Canada since the founding of the country. French versus English. There's a whole bunch of them that in Europe, when the country was being founded, were extreme and in many cases caused conflict. And Canada now has stuck their nose into one with running the risk that we're going to be importing this conflict and further running the risk that we are going to be triggering cultural grievances that will span many neighborhoods in this country, not just because of the cultural grievance of Palestine versus Israel. I mean, where does it end? Is it Korea and Japan? Is it Russia and Ukraine? Is it, I could list so many of them. I mean, never mind. You get it. You understand that where you go out through this world, inside of Canada, there are people who in other countries have issues, or there are people who worse have countries that they're having issues inside of their own country. So now we're going to fold in a new element of civil war inside of Canada over a country that is on the other side of the planet. This is a bad idea. However, all of that aside, all of the foolishness and the poor diplomacy that is being exhibited by the Liberal government, let's consider that we should have demanded that Palestine, the Palestinian Authority, acknowledge Israel's right to exist, and then we would acknowledge Palestine's right to exist. We would acknowledge Palestine to exist. I should have said it like that. Because right now we're acknowledging Israel and we're acknowledging Palestine, but Palestine is not acknowledging Israel. And so what good are we doing? But I don't expect the Liberal government to understand any of that. It just seems that they want to create this kind of strife inside of Canada. It looks like they're trying to distract from the fact that housing is, expensive through the roof. Food is through the roof. Mark Carney built a fake house and made an announcement, and all kinds of foolishness that's going on in this country that it seems our government is desperate to distract Canadians from. On September 15th, 2025, an open letter was penned by 100 industry leaders inside of Canada directed towards Prime Minister Carney. And they were making some very specific demands or requests of Prime Minister Carney. And we're going to be looking at those right away. I'm not going to read the entire letter to you. It's just essentially saying you've had some time, you need to get to work, and here's what we suggest that you do. So they list 5. Let's call them requests or guideposts to the Liberal government and Mark Carney on how we can get business and industry back up and running. You would think that Mark Carney would understand that, but he's a zealot, so he's locked inside of his, he's locked inside of his little echo chamber, and because he doesn't have any worries about money, he doesn't think that anybody else does. Making the changes expressed in the earlier Build Canada Now letters are necessary to send clear signals that Canada is open for business. To reiterate, we believe that your government must focus on the following. Significantly simplify regulations. The Federal Impact Assessment Act and the West Coast tanker ban are impeding development and need to be overhauled and repealed respectively. Existing processes are complex, unpredictable, subjective, and excessively long. Processes need to be clarified and simplified, and decisions must withstand judicial review. So get out of the way. Repeal those bills and move aside, because we want to get to work, and you're the only thing that's blocking our path, Liberal government Mark Carney. Shorten timeline for project approvals. The federal government needs to dramatically reduce regulatory timelines to approve all projects within months, not years of application. This is required to restore investor confidence and once again attract capital to Canada. Clarity on provincial versus federal jurisdiction related to the project approvals is also required and needs to be respected. What we have to understand is that when the federal government imposes restrictions, they are overstepping their bounds. The province has the right to decide what to do with their products. The province has the right to decide more than the federal government. That's why the federal government has to draft all these laws, because all they're trying to do is block what provinces do with their own resources. Commit to grow production, not limit it. The federal government's unlegislated cap on emissions must be eliminated to allow the sector to grow and achieve its potential for the benefit of Canada and Canadians. The production cap, quote unquote, creates uncertainty, is redundant, will result in production cuts, and stifles investment. Well, I think that's pretty straightforward. I believe that there are a lot of industry leaders that are calling for the removal of the industrial cap, emissions cap, excuse me. And of course, it begs the question, why would the Liberal government put it there if they didn't believe that it would limit the province's ability to access its own resources? 4, fiscal framework that attracts investment. The federal carbon levy on large emitters is not globally cost competitive and should be repealed, allowing provinces to set regulations. The federal government can lead cooperation across jurisdictions, protecting domestic and international competitiveness. Industry needs to be clear, competitive, and durable fiscal framework, including associated with carbon and overall taxation to secure capital and incentivize investment. Again, get out of the way. Incent Indigenous investment opportunities. The federal government needs to provide Indigenous loan guarantees at scale so industry can create ownership opportunities to increase prosperity and to ensure Indigenous communities benefit from resource development. I'll come back to that. As you have clearly stated, our country needs to move from uncertainty to prosperity. There needs to be tangible change to make this happen. And without clear and urgent action, we risk missing a generational opportunity to capture the potential before Canada now. As Parliament resumes for the fall sitting, the energy industry remains committed to working with you, your cabinet, and the provinces on an urgent basis to achieve the energy sector's potential for good of Canada. Together, Canada can become the global energy superpower we all envision. We look forward to your response. He didn't respond. Now, make no mistake, there are plenty of Indigenous bands in this country that have those resources on their own land, and they should be rewarded for that in much grander scale than the idea that I'm about to tell you. But for moving things across their territories or across their property, they should simply just be given a share, just like every other shareholder, right? I mean, Brookfield is a shareholder company, and Mark Carney owns a bunch of shares in Brookfield. So the same idea would hold true, that if for whatever reason we just want to move a pipeline across there, then just give them a percentage of, a number of shares to the band, and they can spread the money out as they see fit. And of course, if you want to go onto First Nations territory and develop the mining or the minerals or any of the natural resources that are probably present on their properties, then the company should offer a stronger deal to get the government out of the way. You understand? Like you say, guaranteed loans, and that's great because it's always difficult to find the funding for these projects. However, in short of that, because we know that the federal government does not move their feet, especially when it comes to problem solving in the First Nations, it's better for you to just give them the money as a percentage of the investment on the development, and then they can take their cut, and that can be paid back, and all of the things that come along with that. Spread the wealth. That way there, everybody will be happy. Create the jobs. That way there, everybody will be happy. And get the federal government out of the way, because the federal government has no right to be in the way. That's why they had to pass these absurd laws, because they had no other way to interfere with the development of these particular products. Okay, now we'll get to Pierre Poilievre and Vassy. And it was a half-hour interview, which is quite long for her show. They played it out in 2 segments. But there were a couple of times, like there was a lot of it that was pretty benign. There was a lot of back and forth. She asked, he answered. And then a couple of times she challenged him on a couple of the issues that are before Canada and before Canadians. And she was coming at him a little bit as the leader of the opposition, but mostly she was coming at him as the things of being the leader of the Conservative Party and comparing his things that he says and the thoughts and ideas that he has directly to that of Mark Carney. And I think that a couple that I saved you were pretty good examples of how Pierre Poilievre is not just adept at keeping reporters in their place at all of these functions, and the person that's out on the front line with just their cell phone and a little bit of a note from the head office. Vassy is a seasoned interviewer, and she's done a lot of them with people that are of the political spectrum. So we can expect from her a level of not only being professional, but also being adept at getting to the root of the question or getting an answer, a direct, straight answer. And yet, Pierre Poilievre managed not only to hold his own, but like I said, put her back on her heels.
On that subject of a pipe from northern Alberta to the Pacific coast, today Mark Carney and the Liberals have a ban on increased oil production to put the oil in the pipe, and a ban on shipping the oil out of the pipe.
Both of which they say C5 would override if the case for it was there.
But they're 6 months in and they still haven't said they would override either of those things.
On a case-by-case basis, they have. Explicitly, I've interviewed the energy minister and he said so.
To be clear,
he said that C5 could be used for that. I asked specifically.
Could be.
Yes, they haven't said would be, but it will have to be for LNG, for example. LNG phase 2 would take emissions to a level that didn't fit in BC's climate plan, so they'll have to use it.
They won't use it. So far, they have not said they will use it. They could do a lot of things, but they haven't done them. We're 6 months into the term. If you want a pipe from Alberta to the Pacific, you need to legalize the production of the oil going in the pipe and the shipping of the oil coming out of the pipe. Mark Carney has done neither, and he has not even announced he's done either. And that is why the company that was originally going to build Northern Gateway has already said they wouldn't even consider putting a shovel in the ground for such a project under Carney's current legal regime. But you know what they are doing? I'm talking about Enbridge now. They're building 2 pipelines in the United States of America, creating work for workers, jobs for American workers, American steel producers, American energy workers. Why is it that yet another Canadian company is taking billions of dollars out of Carney's liberal economy and sending it south? I want to bring that money back home, and we've got a plan to do it.
Oh, that's great. Could, and she said the word herself, and then she's like, yeah, well, they haven't said they're going to yet, but they're going to, in her mind, they're going to be left with no choice. And of course, we know that there's nothing about the Liberal government that ever respects the possibilities or the choice. They have yet to do anything in 6 months. I mean, you campaigned on saying to Canadians you know exactly how to solve the problem, and you have done nothing but compound the problem over the last half of a year. I mean, that says to me that Canadians should be fed up and impatient with the waiting all the time of the Liberal government. And I don't understand how they have support. Now, I know recent polls indicate that the Liberals have lost quite a few points, and then some of them have the Conservatives out in front. However, I believe that there should be a greater groundswell and a greater frustration from Canadians, because these are good paying jobs. And more to the point, these are good paying jobs that would target many of the youth that are desperately seeking decent paying careers right now. And why would we not be employing these individuals who now, based on what Pierre Poilievre just said, are probably running down into the States to get jobs to install those pipelines and spending their money in America on American businesses and buying American food and American homes and marrying and having children in America. All the while, Canada withers and gets broker and broker with every passing second, because with every passing second, Mark Carney borrows more and more money, because rather than generate the money, he just wants to borrow it from somebody else. And then he says Canada's not for sale. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of things in there that make no sense.
Mr. Carney once again pulled a bait and switch.
Well, to be fair, you just said that there'd be cuts. You didn't detail the degree to which you would.
We did actually. I don't have my platform in front of me, but we did have the dollar figures that we plan to save. I think it was
$56 billion is what your total was, but you didn't break that down.
We did break it down by public service, consultants,
so how many thousands of Canadians should lose their job in the public service?
Hundreds of thousands of Canadians could gain their jobs, should gain jobs. And that's what we will do when we get rid of the capital gains tax on businesses that reinvest in this country. When we cut taxes on workers, they spend more at local restaurants. When we approve more projects in the resource sector, all of those welders, pipe fitters, carpenters, though, not only employ themselves, but then they go and spend at local hotels and restaurants creating even more jobs. I'm proposing a boom in job creation. That is what our Conservative plan is, and we encourage the Liberals to adopt it.
And I take your point on all that, and with respect, my question was how many public servants should lose their jobs, not how many private sector jobs should be created.
Well, it's a combination of the two, and you know, we still have some time before the next election when you'll see our platform.
Well, maybe. You never know.
You never know.
It's a minority.
I'm better at predicting the past than the future, but I appreciate your impatience. You're asking the right questions, and I can tell you you'll have the right answers before you go voting in the next election. Our job right now as official opposition is to signal a direction, which is we need less money for bureaucracy and more money for taxpayers and job creators.
I showed you that last one because it showcased the things that I'm trying to show to individuals about the personality and the capability of Pierre Poilievre, who answered the question, but yet Vassy still found it to be away from the question she asked. So she took the conversation back to it. And rather than go and ah and like you would hear from so many of the Liberal Party, he answered the question directly as best to his ability, saying that, well, when they lose those jobs, there will be jobs for them to go to. As they currently are being cut by the Liberal government, there's no jobs for them to go to. And of course, the Liberal government knows that what Pierre Poilievre said, that, you know, once they get jobs, they'll start to spend locally. If the Liberal government wasn't aware of that, then please explain to me why they're demanding that all civil servants go back to work 5 days a week. They're demanding that because they want the money to be spent on the bus. They want the money to be spent at the coffee shops in the downtown areas. They want the money to be spent, the money that they're giving to these civil servants to be injected back into the economy. Of course, they're not caring about what happens to the civil servant on that aspect either. And they're going to replace as many as possible with the AI. So the idea that these civil servants would have a place to go to, a job to land on their feet with, seems to me should be something that appeals to the civil servant who is looking at job losses no matter which way you go. And no matter how long you think you can hold on, sooner or later somebody's going to come to the door of the Liberal government with a computer that's going to be able to replace, you know, the entire accounting department of whatever, or the entire research department of whatever. And that in itself is going to put people out of work, and they should all feel confident that they have a job to go to, much like you see the Argentinian prime minister has been able to do. And that, of course, will generate economy. So now, as a result of the bureaucracy being smaller, there's less tax dollars being put into the system by Canadian governments. There's less money being borrowed by Canadian governments. There's more people that are working for capitalist and private industry, therefore generating a greater economy for the country, causing, with cause and effect spending, to create more jobs and more prosperity and more affluence, which of course improves local governments, which improves the skills and the services that they have to offer, and it ripples out across the board. And it's not a system that hasn't been put to the test. This is how the American system has operated for a long, long time. And yes, we can talk about healthcare and we can talk about some of the significant differences, but there are between the differences and where we are right now, there is a whole host of industry and finances that we could be generating to improve the state of life, not only for the individual that lives in this country, but for the new people that are trying to find a better standard of living, that are coming to this country, because the jobs is what they're after. And then when they get their money, they're going to want to spend it. And what will they spend it on? How will they build the house? Of course, when we move through the jobs, it ripples out. I believe that the people who don't support the Conservatives should look at that answer and realize that it doesn't matter if you agree with Pierre Poilievre for whatever reason. He's still doing his best to look out for you. That's just my opinion. You can leave me your opinion down in the comments. I would encourage all of you to like, comment, share, subscribe. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.